What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about a bug fix coming to a game near you, probably in patch 15.16, for Rumble and other champions. We're going to talk about the long-standing blue versus red side win rate disparity and at least a partial fix for why that exists. So, a history of this bug. Essentially, we've known for a long time that Rumble had a really large disparity in blue side versus red side win rate. There are plenty of theories why. One of the big ones was that Rumble R had such a long range that the camera angle was going to be important, right? Being able to see up and to the right so that you can cast your R and reliably see where you're supposed to aim it and have the enemies in range. And this is like not a bad theory. I think it's actually true for many champions where it is in fact easier to play some champions on blue side due to the camera angle. I think that is just kind of true. Now that said, Nexus Blitz came out at one point, several times in fact, and Nexus Blitz is a horizontal map where the camera is identical between teams. And it was noted that Rumble still had a blue-red win rate disparity even when the camera was functionally equivalent. And so that meant that we knew in the back of our heads somewhere that there was clearly something else going wrong that caused Rumble to have a different power level between blue and red team. It never got much farther than that. We didn't have any great theories, and seemingly the community didn't really either, but clearly we knew something was wrong. We also knew that just across League of Legends, the majority of champions have blue versus red win rate differences. And so the severity can often be papered over because, well, yeah, okay, maybe the map favors blue, all these things favor, who knows. But clearly it's a true phenomenon. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but if we don't know how to fix it, it's hard to do anything. So this got spawned, basically the reinvestigation got spawned by the community. Shout out everyone who kind of chimed in, was like, here's what we're seeing, here's some measured data, here's some theories about why this might be happening. This would not have been reinvigorated without the community, so y'all are wonderful. Thank you very much. Also want to note that a lot of the internet theories we saw, I for sure did not see a single theory that was like, oh, this is exactly what's happening. Some people had like partially the right answer. We're like, oh, some of the things you're saying is valuable information. Like, oh, this is true. This is demonstrably true. That's demonstrably true. Okay, that's a theory and you're wrong about it. So ultimately, yes, what team you're on did matter. The load order of the champions did matter, and being a damage over time did matter. Those are things to basically go off of, where I basically ran the investigation and we found what we were looking for. I eventually found what the problem was and how to get to it. And so first thing I did, because I saw that Rumble and Singed were the champions that were like getting picked up here, I was like, these champions have issues. And I was like looking at it, I was like, oh wow, okay, I'm seeing some stuff here. Rumble had the biggest winner delta in the game, and like, well, Rumble Q and Singed Q are kind of similar abilities, so I'll like port over Singed Q's tech. That didn't really do anything, that didn't help. It's not actually a problem with how Rumble's doing the damage, like that's not one of the things. Singed actually functionally has identical problems. The bug report that the champs team queue I had generated was like, hey, the example case of dashing across Singed Q or like Rumble R really quickly has a blue-red disparity. And the things I was looking at was like, hey, but like Flame Spitter is doing weird things, or missing like damage takes in some cases, or damage is late or whatever. That seems to be something different. And so started diving in, and I said, hey, okay, who are some other like long-term dot champions where I can make some direct comparisons? And so I like made a custom game. I was running 8 clients, and I had 2 Rumbles running each team, a Singed, a Brand, and Malzahar in each team. I looked through all their scripting, and I'm like, okay, look, under the hood, the damage flow, the actual damage flow, like how you take damage on Singed Q and Brand Q and Malzahar, Brand passive and Malzahar E, are basically all the same. And I retrofitted Rumble Q to be Singed Q. Again, they're all kind of the same, and it's like, okay, these are running basically the identical damage logic. And Brand is fine, Malzahar is fine, and Rumble and Singed are not. Okay, what is different here? And I was like looking at, it's like Brand script, for example. Brand script says like when you land a spell, put this buff on somebody, right? And the buff says every quarter second, damage me. The buff lasts 4 seconds. It says every quarter second, damage me. And at the end of the buff, if the buff timed out, like it wasn't removed by some kind of turbo cleanse, deal 1 more tick of damage, which makes good on how much damage has to be dealt by the buff itself. And blue side Brand, red side Brand, fighting a blue side or red side champion, I got 16 ticks almost every time. Once in a while you get 15 because the game sometimes won't count all the way to 16 based on a different problem that we're not solving here. There is a way to solve it with, engineering fixes, but that's not what this thing is about. Malzahar is different. Malzahar also counts to 16, but he also specifically in the script counts to 16, like literally counts. And if he gets 16, he kills the buff. And functionally Malzahar like lasts long enough where you can always count to 16 and then like kill the buff on himself. But Bran does it by like doing slightly different things and then like adding buff at the very end. That works out fine. And Brand you can't really have count because you can refresh the duration of Brand passive by landing another spell. And so again, you can find a way to solve that in script by like if a new buff gets added, you can like restart the count. Like there are ways to get around that, but again, not the point of this bug. But it's like, okay, so Brand and Malzahar work, and I do not have blue-red disparities, and their damage flow is the exact same as Singed and Rumble. Okay, what the hell? What's going on? Okay, it's not the damage flow then. I'm kind of jumping around in the timeline here. I'm just kind of going through the notes I took here. This entire fix took about 2 days, combining investigation and finally building the fix and then making sure it's good and then other minor things there. There's actually a little bit more work to do, but we're basically 2 days in and we're pretty much ready to go. Various crimes were considered when it's like, hey, look, I actually now can reliably reproduce that, red side Rumble just gets 1 less tick of Q. In basically all contexts, red side Rumble just does 1 less tick of damage with his Q. What if we just say red side Rumble Q lasts a quarter second longer? That's a crime. That's a terrible idea. But it's like, if there's nothing else, we could do that. There was a really anyway, basically dug around these scripts, right? Threw a whole bunch of debugs in, and I finally had an epiphany. And this was me using Singed. And I realized that if the Singed who's casting the spell is on blue team, so I basically had a debug, and it's what I put in and said, okay, give me the game time when this buff is added to the champion. And then every time you try to deal damage, and also every time you try to deal damage, count up by 1. And when the buff is over, give me the count. Like, did I count to 1? Did I count to 2? Did I count to 3? Did I not count at all? Am I still at 0? Whenever the buff ends. And similarly, I want you to, whenever you deal damage, get the time of the game again and do the difference and tell me how long the buff's been alive when you deal damage. And what I noticed was the epiphany, which is if you are blue team Singed, you deal damage at 0, 0.25, and 0.5. And if you're sitting in Poison Trail, 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0, 0.25, 0.5, over and over and over again. You would refresh it and it would be 0, etc. And if you are red team Singed, it was 0.25, 0.5, 0.25, 0.5, 0.25, 0.5. I'm like, oh, so if it's a red champion applying the buff to a blue champion, it doesn't tick at 0. It's the same buff. It's the same script. It's not like it's a different script if you're on blue or red team. But like, that's the thing. Blue team is getting damage at 0 somehow, and red team isn't. And then I finally realized I know what the problem is. I know what the underlying issue is here. And so it's a order of events problem, essentially. So the interface that we use as designers when using scripting tools is there's an event called buff on or item on or char on. Basically says the script runs on a buff or an item or a character. Update actions. Update actions runs roughly every quarter second. Update actions is also, incidentally, though this is not the cause of the bug, the same time at which the game will clean up buffs. On average, if you're not picky about how long the buff lasts, it will always last until the next update actions and then clean itself up. And that's where the bug is. Because what seems to happen, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a tech designer, so I haven't looked at the game's code, but this seems to completely line up with all possible cases, including the fact, if I go back one slide, the Champs QA guy came back to me. He's been working with like one of the Champs engineers, and I'm over here on SRT like doing the design work. And so like I've talked with a lot of people here. Like there's a lot of people who are like responsible for some of the help here, but we're like the ones that are doing all the actual work, development work on it. And they're like, hey, so we did like some more investigations, like Corky W and Shyvana RE don't have this bug. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I like load up Corky. Because at this point I've realized that like, oh, it's a case of areas on the ground or areas on the map that persistently reapply a debuff of what's going on here. And so when they brought Shyvana RE and Corky W, I'm like, wait, Corky W doesn't have this bug? what's going on? And I throw in the Corki debugs, and Corki, whether you're blue or red side, doesn't count to 0. It's always 0.25 and 0.5. And I was like, guys, I don't know what it is. I'll investigate more on my own, but like, that's news to me. I'll look into it. Maybe there's something I don't know. And then I realized, nope, I'm still right. Corki W uses minions. Turns out if you use minions, there's no bug. But Rumble and Singed don't use minions. And so they're prone to the bug, and Corki W doesn't. And like, oh, cool. I got new information, and it matched my understanding of the world. Okay, I'm like increasingly sure I'm right. So it comes down to the update actions stack ordering is how I'm going to describe this. So imagine every character in the game is in a stack. I'm just going to say there's 5 champions right now, or 5 units total, right? There's the blue team champs, there's the red team champs, and there's minions, okay? So here's how it works if you're a blue champ, right? And it goes in order, right? So I'm Singed, right? And I have Singed Q on, and so the script that handles this, which is Poison Trail Applicator, says on update actions, look in an area around everywhere there's a Poison Trail cloud, right? And so like Singed has 7 stacks of this buff on him at all points in time, and it's, cloud A is like, stack 1 is referencing the location cloud A, stack 2 is referencing the location of cloud B, stack 3 is referencing the location of cloud C, etc. And so the buff itself runs through all the logic. Each stacker runs its logic. Each buff runs the logic and says, okay, if someone is in an area around location A, debuff them with Poison Trail damage. Very simple. And Rumble does the same thing, basically. Rumble, close enough. Rumble's close enough, Rumble R's close enough, whatever. Corki W is kind of close enough as well. So what happens is it runs the logic, right? It goes, okay, let's go run all of Singed's buff on the blue team. And it goes, okay, well, update actions. Look for units around these circles. And if they're in one of these circles, give them the debuff. And it goes, cool, they got the debuff. And then in the same frame, it goes down, it goes, who's next? Singed's jungler, then Singed's mid laner, then his, AD carry, then his support, and then we go to the Alawi top laner. And it's all the same server frame. We go, hey, Alawi, what about your buffs? And Alawi goes, well, I've got this Poison Trail damage debuff on me. And it goes, that's nice. What's the update action say? It says take damage. Okay, you're going to take damage. And then a quarter second later, the game goes, all right, so Singed Q, what's going on? And Singed Q goes, well, if they've got a lockout buff on them, don't do anything. Okay, fine. She has a lockout buff on her. We go to Alawi. She says, I'm going to take damage. Okay, cool. Quarter second later, Singed Q says, hey, if they have a lockout buff on her, don't apply any new debuffs. Okay, so I won't. The lockout buff lasts half a second. Alawi goes, hey, what's going on in your buffs? And it goes, well, my lockout buff has been up for half a second now. I should get rid of that. Also, I have this other buff that says take damage. So I take damage. And then another quarter second comes around, and Singed Q goes, hey, there's Alawi in a circle here, and she has no lockout buff. I'm going to debuff her again. Okay. And then we go to Alawi, and Alawi says, hey, I've got a debuff on me. I should take damage. Cool. That cycle runs every quarter second. Now, what if you're red team Singed? Well, so let's say Singed is on red and Alawi's on blue. Okay, we got on the list. Hey, Alawi, what's going on? Nothing, I have no buffs. Okay, cool. Hey, Singed, what's going on? Alawi's in my circle, give her a debuff. Okay. Quarter second later, Alawi's like, hey, I've got a debuff on me. I should take damage. Okay. And there you go. And that replicates. Now, what's funny is like 12 years ago, Singed Q was refactored to not be a bunch of minions. It was made to be a bunch of stacks of a buff on Singed and Singed reference locations. When Singed Q was minions are at the bottom of the order, so Alawi would be like, nothing's happening. And the Singed would go, nothing's happening. And then the minion that Singed spawned 2 seconds ago would be like, hey, Alawi's in my circle, give her a debuff. Okay. And a quarter second later, hey, Alawi, what's up? I'm debuffed, give me damage. Okay. And so that's why, for example, Corki W is minions. And so Corki W doesn't have a problem. The damage won't tick for a full quarter second because you have to go to the next stack. You have to go through the next update actions loop. But there is a fundamental blue-red disparity here, where if you're blue, it handles your application, then it handles the debuff in the same frame. If you're red, it's too late. Wait for the next update actions tick. Do it again. And so you're always a quarter second late for all those champions. For anyone who doesn't use minions and uses a stack of update actions triggers. So again, we go back to Brand and Malzahar as examples. Those aren't waiting for update actions to apply the debuff. They're casting a spell on you. I execute on the target at a random point in time, which is basically by certainty not in between the update actions loop between blue champs and red champs. That's basically impossible. It's I'm sure it's maybe happened. I actually don't even know how the engine would handle that. I don't know if it would like wait until the event is over anyway. Like it might be literally impossible for there to be a blue-red disparity there. I actually don't know. Again, I'm not an engineer. But it's like Brand doesn't have this problem because Brand just puts the buff on you at a random point in time. Leandri's doesn't have the problem because if I like cast an EQ and it hits you at some random point in time. And that damage says immediately apply a debuff. So there's no blue-red problems for like dots in general. It's specifically an update actions call that puts a debuff that says do an update actions call. In that case, you get skipped because it's too late and you're a quarter second behind. Now what's funny is Singed, Rumble Q, and Rumble R all had reasons why they could be papered over in some cases, where it wasn't quite as bad. So I talked about Singed a little bit here, but the way Singed Q works is it puts on a half-second lockup buff on you. It has no logic on it, just exists. And what it means is because Poison Trail can be stacked on itself, you can have like 7 zones on top of each other, it would mean that in a given frame, you'd get the same buff added to you 7 times, and these would override each other, but like that's incredibly non-performant to tell a stack of minions every quarter second to apply 7 buffs on each other, delete and re-add a buff 7 times, and Singe Q is on all the time. So it would be really, really constant. So I totally understand why you'd want some kind of way to not just iterate 7 buffs on a unit for literally no reason. But because the Singed Q was a half-second lockout, and it would be willing to wait until the next update actions loop, what happened was, right, you're blue Alawi, I'm red Singed, I debuff you. Yes, my damage comes late, 0.25 seconds. It comes again, 0.5 seconds. You've taken 2 ticks of damage. And your poison is also half second gone, by the way, right? It's a 2.1 second duration. It's now 1.6. But as Alawi, you're like, hey, it's been 0.5 seconds. My debuff, my lockout's gone. And then right next in line is Singed going, no lockout, debuffed. And you refresh the duration back to 2.1. And so red side Singed slightly papered this over. You switch it around, right? Imagine your blue side Singed, and your blue side Singed, and here's red side Alawi. Blue side Singed says, I'm going to debuff you. Alawi goes, okay, takes damage right away. Obviously, again, power positive for blue. And then we go 0.25 seconds, and Singed goes, are you locked out? Yep. Okay, no big deal. We go to Alawi. She takes damage. Okay, we go to 0.5 seconds. Singed goes, are you locked out? She goes, yep. And then we get to her, and she goes, all right, my buff's gone. And Singed has to wait until 0.75 seconds to put the debuff back on. So blue side Singed, you can actually look at this on live right now. Go sit in Poison Trail as red versus blue in multiplayer practice tool or whatever, or a custom game or whatever it is, and you'll note that one team Singed restarts the debuff timer more quickly than the other. But on the other side, if you're fast with it, you use flash, whatever, you'll notice that one side Singed will get 1 more tick of damage than the other if you leave the circle right away. You've got a half-second window to leave the circle on time before you refresh the duration, and you will always get 1 less tick of damage, just straight up. So that was like slightly papered over because there would be plenty of cases where red team would get the extra refresh, and that might even give 2 more ticks of damage, right? If you get the refresh, that's an extra half second or more of duration that blue might not have gotten because the Poison Trail timed out in time, right? You walked in late or it got cast or whatever it is, right? Rumble Q also had this, by the way. Rumble Q papered over for a different reason. The way Rumble Q is coded right now on live is it tries to be a damage over time while not being a damage over time. So the damage logic says, am I untargetable? If so, stop. It says, am I more than 700 units away from Rumble? If so, stop. Is Rumble Q still active? If it's not, stop. Technically, the logic in the reverse of that, it's if you keep going, and if, not, there's just no logic. But it means that, what do we talk about with Singed? Well, red team Rumble deals damage to a blue side champ. Again, blue side champ, nothing happens. Debuff is applied. Wait a quarter second. Blue team takes damage. But for the last tick, blue team says, hey, does Rumble still have his Q on? Rumble goes, yep. Blue team takes damage. We then go later on in the same frame, and Rumble goes, oh, my Q's over. I should end. And so you would actually still get 12 ticks of damage for both Rumbles, unlike the Singed case, where if you jumped in and jumped out, you would just be 1 tick off. So Rumble Q happened to paper over this by having an exit condition on Rumble Q and having a conditional damage on the end on the burn. Just worked out that way. Rumble R in kind of a similar boat here, where like Rumble R was also in sort of a weird issue where, again, the debuffs come out here. It's based on a buff on Rumble or whatever. And so because the trail is functionally a bunch of noted locations, but it's a buff on Rumble. Like, the missiles themselves don't exist. The missiles are a visual representation of the fact that there's a buff zone here, 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 and they exist on Rumble for some amount of time. And so a blue team player walks over and goes, all right, should I take damage or whatever? And the Rumble goes, yeah, buff's on me, essentially. It doesn't ultimately really matter here because Rumble's like ultimately going to say like, are you in my zone? Okay, cool. Then remove it. So I don't think Rumble R actually really does paper over anything. I'll take this back, but it was still some situation of it does the same thing as Singed and everything else where you might not take damage right away and things like that might happen. Yeah, I'm pretty sure from recollection, there's no papering over for Rumble R. Okay, so the fix. One, again, the Champs engineer is working on this. We've talked a little bit. He's going to have better ideas than I can, but essentially, obviously, he's going to try to make the engine be good about understanding this logic flow and finding a way to make good on that, while understanding that sometimes buffs can end. What do they do when they end? Again, that's kind of out of me. So I built the script fix, talked with several other people around this, both gameplay engineers and game designers. Ultimately, the suggested solution, I forget if it was someone else's idea, but it did spawn out of a convo with one other game designer. I was like, oh, this would work. Again, I don't know if it was my idea or his, but either way, a lot of discussions were very useful here. So the fix is basically using a combination of directed damage and delays. So if the problem is that if we add a buff to you during the server frame, we get a desync, we need to add the buff to you not during the server frame. And so the part A of the fix, the incomplete fix, is when you are going to take the debuff, wait a 1/10 of a second, then add the debuff. Now you're getting it added to you in some off time, and now no matter who you are, blue or red, it will always tick after 1/4 second. Now, that is shippable, but it means that everyone now has, everyone who works like this has unresponsive dots. You walk into the cloud, you wait a 1/4 second, then you take damage. That feels bad for the champs who are playing the champions. Rumble and Singed, this works, this currently works against every champion, right? And it works fine against minions, because again, minions are later in the order, so they're always going to take damage immediately, blue or red. But in champion combat, Singed just deals damage a 1/4 second late, Rumble just deals damage a 1/4 second late. And it's like, I don't want to degrade blue side champions and everyone's minion experience for this bugs. That's bad. I don't make the champions feel worse to play. That's terrible. So what I also do is I say, well, in this buff on in this update actions, what I'm going to do is say, look, if you don't have the burn on you already, I'm going to pull the damage calc and I'm going to damage 1 tick on you. So, as though your blue team were hitting minions, I'm still getting the damage right away. But I'm technically dealing the damage from a different source, kind of. I'm dealing it via the applicator just as a one-time thing. And then wait 0.1 seconds and then apply the buff as normal. And this means now everyone gets immediately responsive damage. And they're going to last for an amount. And I'm just going to I just basically mess with buff numbers or buff durations to make it line up. And in fact, I can even slightly future-proof this, because one thing that's also true, because so Rumble Q and Rumble R have an incredibly large nest of buffs that talk to each other, more than are probably needed. And in fact, the more buffs that talk to buffs, the more your timing can be desynced, because ultimately just things don't quite line up the way you want them to, even if you try to make them all exact and measure everything out. Just it doesn't really work that way. So I removed a decent number of buffs talking to other buffs, and instead what I did was say, look, I'm going to put a dot on you, and that dot is going to count. And in the case of Singed Q, it's going to count to, I think, 7. I have to double check, but it's going to count to 7 or 8. Because even if I reapply Singed Q, okay, we start the count over, that's fine. But I make the poison last on you long enough that I will always get the number of ticks I expect. And I'm going to have you count. And if you count to this number, just get rid of the buff. And at some other point in time, sure, I'm going to repoison you, whatever. And there's probably going to be a case where it's like, essentially it's essentially going to be fine. You can probably technically take extra damage if you're blue and they're red, because the buff ends and you walk back into the cloud at exactly that time and you weren't already refreshed. That's really unlikely, but it's theoretically possible, but way, way less likely than, every single time you use Poison Trail. And so I have Rumble Q count, and the way Rumble Q works, by the way, right, is Rumble tried to put a 0.5 or 0.75 second long burn on you. And so if you were blue, you took damage at 0 and 0.25 and 0.5. And if you were red, you didn't take damage at 0, you took damage at 0.25, you took damage at 0.5, and the buff ended. And so if you did flicker hits, blue would deal 50% more damage than red. If they were minions, you'd always get 3 ticks. Okay, well, Rumble Q is still going to last about 0.5 seconds, offset by a tenth, and I'm going to immediately damage you the second you're in Flame Spitter if you weren't already on fire. So I get damage at 0, and I get damage at 0.25, and I get damage at 0.5 every time now. And because I'm not going to worry about buffs talking to each other, I'm also going to have Rumble Q itself count. It's going to count to 12. It's going to last long enough that it can always get to 12. And then instead of ever going to 13, it's going to end itself as soon as it goes to 12. And you get your last tick, and like, whatever happened. We got the 12 bursts of lighting people on fire, and then we're done there. And I'm going to rely on the damage, the dot itself, to just handle itself and be like, you're on fire. If you somehow try to count to 3, don't, and stop. But realistically, you're just going to count to 2 every time because the durations are not nearly so fickle, and it's going to be fine. Rumble R, substantial actual rescript here. It's going to tick. So there were... Rumble R is another case where the way that Rumble R works under the hood is it shoots out a missile, right? So when you do a vector target, you're functionally shooting out like a Victor E. You're shooting out a vector missile that, goes down the line, right? And that missile every so often says, hey, wherever I am right now, mark this as a zone and throw a missile onto the ground. And then throw a missile onto the ground, and throw a missile on the ground, throw a missile on the ground, throw a missile on the ground. And so that's how you get the 6 missiles for Rumble R. And every time one of those spells is cast, it's cast at that location. And so it says, okay, put a buff on Rumble, the applicator buff on Rumble, let it stack, because they're all going to stack. Stack and overlap, so their timers overlap with each other and they end at different times. And it's exactly Poison Trail. It says this is the location, and every update actions, look in a circle around this location. If there's somebody there at the dot them. And again, that means if you were blue Rumble doing it, you'd deal damage at 0 seconds. If you were red side Rumble, you would deal damage at 0.25 seconds and then move forward. But there were several really annoying timing constraints, because one thing that also existed was one of these buffs living on Rumble eventually said, once I am done, get rid of all the buffs. And that meant that the front half of Rumble R would last longer than the back half of Rumble R, despite the fact that they got spawned sequentially at different points in time. There was a line of logic that said, and kill them all. And part of the reason for that was because, I assume anyway, I don't know for sure, but part of the reason for that was, you could get longer than 5 seconds on the front. So let's get rid of it on time or whatever. I'm not sure. I'm speculating here. But ultimately, no, we can have these all handle their own durations and just be really, really good about duration tracking. And we can count if we need to and get rid of them if we need to, but these should be okay. So yeah, Singe Q, similar boat here, right? Singe Q says, when you walk in a poison trail, if you are not currently poisoned, take a tick of damage. Put a 0.1 second lockout buff on me, and then poison me in 0.1, and then if I don't have lockout buff already, put the poison on me, right? After a tenth of a second delay. And suddenly, bam, every Singe Q does the exact same amount of damage, whether you're blue or red. I cheat teleport in for 1 tick of poison, I cheat teleport out, and the full duration comes through, and I get the exact number I expect. It works on both sides. I count to not ever get too much damage, make the buff duration long enough to not get too few hits. I make the dot durations count themselves, and I do this damage sort of flow thing, which is a little ugly, but not the worst thing in the world, to make sure you get the damage right away, and you get the amount of damage you expect to get overall. So a couple things that are happening here. I mentioned that I made Rumble Q not talk to itself as much. We are almost certainly going to make Rumble Q a true dot. What that means is, because like I mentioned earlier, Rumble Q right now, the burn effect asks, am I untargetable? It asks, am I far away from Rumble? It asks, is his Q over? And it's like, nope, Rumble Q lights you on fire. Every quarter second, Rumble Q basically shoots out a cone, technically shoots out 2, and that cone says, debuff you. Again, the stuff I talked about, do the damage, whatever, I'm just going to paper over that now. But it debuffs you, and then that debuff lasts about half a second, 3/4 second, whatever, enough to get 2 more dot ticks, or 3 if the timing works out, intentionally so. And now it's going to be like, yeah, you're just on fire. So if you Fizz E, you'll take 2 more ticks of damage. If you flash away, you'll take 2 more ticks of damage. That's the gameplay here. So it means that the Flame Spitter itself still lasts 3 seconds, but it can do 3.5 seconds of damage, because 3 seconds ends, and then you got lit on fire, tick, tick. So right now there's obviously a very obvious direct power increase to Rumble, not just counting the bug fix where red side Rumble will literally be as good as Blue Side Rumble now in terms of his spells literally work, but that's a real thing. The next one is I changed Rumble R scripting to not kill the entire buff on some lockout. I just count the duration appropriately, and that means that whether you stand at the beginning of R or the end of R, I'm getting the exact same damage. I'm going to get 5 seconds of damage on you no matter where you're standing. And through a mix of making the timings work out right and make the buff durations look out right, it's all going to be fine. Now, technically, this means I'm telling the zone it only lasts 4.5 seconds now for my 1 second long linger burn. That matches the visuals of the current thing in the game in the first place. Also, I talked about the update and acquire rate. I am not 100% of this one because I'm not going to go back and look at version 1 of the change at a certain point, but I'm pretty sure I cleaned up when the buff zone is spawned so that Rumble R will be more responsive and deal damage sooner in the damage flow. So that should be a small improvement there to Rumble R feeling more responsive. And again, the actual, like, the zone is hot for the right amount of time to match the visual there. And the duration of the dot is tuned such that if you stand still at any point in time on this R, maybe you get a little bit one if you're like right between 2 overlapping zones and you get like 1 more tick in some instances. But like if you're just in the middle of one circle, you will take exactly 5 seconds of damage. And so this ends up being a 4.5 second long zone and a 1 second long linger. And I updated the linger to tick 4 times a second. I know I mentioned with Corki way back when that I really wanted Corki to be, I really wanted dots to be half a second. I have changed my mind around that. I think I was wrong. I think quarter second dots, even though I don't like seeing one fly off every quarter second when you have like really small things like brand passive on minions, quarter second's better. And so over time, we might retrofit more dots to be a quarter second because it's probably better. Anyway, end result here is R should feel a bit better. Rumble R damage fix. Don't know what that is anymore. Doesn't matter. It's fine. Rumble's going to do the amount of damage. It's going to do 10 seconds. It'll be less inconsistent due to counting and whatnot. So I mentioned that singed Q is fixed. I mentioned that I changed the singed Q lockout to be only basically 1 tick instead of sometimes 2 or 3. And so that means it is much more likely that any given champion is going to have the poison duration refreshed as they leave. It is much more likely that once they get out of poison trail, it's going to be on for longer. Basically TLDR that. It also means that like if Singed double taps Q and the poison trail, like the little cloud is there for like 2 seconds, whatever, or 3 seconds, whatever, that is more likely to refresh whatever is under it. And so like single taps of Q on minions will last for longer and in some cases deal more damage based on what the update rate was going to be and any kind of luck factor there. And again, anyone running away from poison trail is more likely to have the full duration of the dot on them because it's going to refresh to full duration every quarter second instead of every half to 3/4 of a second. That's again a meaningful bix there, a meaningful buff here, I should say. Buff, fix, bix, whatever. Reapplying, fixing, and buffing that. Cool. Those are those changes. Also, earlier in the week, or last week, I think, I got into Rek'Sai bug fixes. So thank you everyone who reported these. I appreciate it. Finally have a fix for the tunnel bug location. This is a bit of a crime, but it fixes the problem. So under the hood, what Rek'Sai tries to do is it puts like the script when you cast tunnel, it finds a location based on nearest exit from the wall without cheating too hard and say, this is the location. It goes, this is a spot on the map. And then it says, okay, I'm now going to dash to that spot on the map. And for whatever reason, and Yorick ghouls also had this problem. This is when they would fail to dash over the wall to like follow somebody when you eat them. Sometimes when that location is close to a wall, but not always, but sometimes it will fail to think that location is okay, and the jump will stop short on the other side of the wall. But that location was still tagged and is like a real valid location that a unit could be. And so the tunnel, the logic says, well, if your dash wasn't interrupted by being canceled or CC'd, which it wasn't, you weren't flayed out, it just went short, it says, okay, spawn a tunnel on that location. Because you can put a unit there, but for whatever reason, our like default move command block doesn't like that location once in a while, right? It worked. It was this way with Yorick ghouls. It's this way with Rek'Sai tunnels. So the way I fixed it for Yorick ghouls is said, you know what, screw it. If we do a move to unit, which is how, Lee Sin Q2, Lee Sin W, Katarina E, actually Katarina E might not be that one, sorry. But Lee Sin Q2, Lee Sin W, Jax Q, things like that, that's move to unit. That directly homes in. You can set parameters for how far you go, but like it directly goes, unsurprisingly, to a unit. Those don't have that problem. Those seemed to unerringly go correctly. And so when I fixed the Yorick bug of goes not following, I just said, it's moved to unit, you're just going to go onto the guy. And similarly here for Rek'Sai, I said, okay, this is kind of a crime. And the problem is, right, the tunnel doesn't get spawned until it thinks the dash is done. It does a bunch of math and says, okay, this is how long the dash should take, delay for this long, and then spawn a tunnel, spawn a unit right there. Makes sense, right? Totally logical. Spawn a unit, and most of the times it's fine. You tunnel out, you show up, and then tunnel shows up behind you. Very reasonable. Well, that unit doesn't exist when I'm trying to dash. The location exists, the unit doesn't. And so the crime I'm committing is I spawn a test cube. I'm using minions. I spawn a test cube, and I say, this test cube has spawned at the location. Hey, Rek'Sai, it's not a dash, it's a move to unit. Move to the test cube, and then immediately kill the test cube. Like, literally, like, the instructions are spawn test cube, move to unit, kill test cube. Suddenly the dash works. It's not the most egregious thing ever. Like, it's not a whole bunch of bloated stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm spawning a cube so I can dash to it. But it should fix the Rek'Sai bug. It should fix the Rek'Sai bug. So Rek'Sai players, hope you enjoy that. Also, this is an oversight on my end. Thank you for reporting it. Yeah, if you are at the tail end of the buff of your Q and you're mid auto attack, the buff duration refresh on Q was only on hit, right when the attack completes. But if you're using an empowered attack and literal attack replacement, and the buff times out, your attack gets replaced with your basic attack again. But you're not basic attacking, you're using Rek'Sai Q, which doesn't exist anymore, and so it fails. You like the animation keeps playing out, but it no longer exists to like deal damage. And so now on pre-attack, I refresh the Q duration so that you always have it. So the end of Q is now going to be good. As long as you can start the Q, it's going to immediately refresh the duration. You're going to be okay. So that's the fix for Rek'Sai as well. Now this is just kind of a random slide, right? We are not in the reactive balance process right now. Rumble is almost certainly getting overbuffed. My estimation of the value of the blue-red shift is between 2 and 2.5% win rate to red side Rumble only, which is still like 1-something% win rate. I also think the various script updates to make the Q and the R better. I mean, literally, Q can do between 50 and like 17% more damage. It's obviously a big deal. That's quite a lot of win rate. When Rumble Q was made to like be a dot in the first place, like 13 years ago, that was like 5% win rate by itself. Like your primary damage tool being a bit better is massive, right? Keep in mind, 3 attack damage on people who like rely on spells for their damage, like Lee Sin. Yeah, of course he attacks, don't get me wrong, but like 3 attack damage is 1% by itself, and he like wants to cast spells all the time. If Rumble, his Q, which is actually all of his damage, I mean, not quite, but like, you know, kind of all of his damage, if that does 15% more damage, that's extremely large amounts of win rate, right? Like that itself could even be 5%. Probably not quite, but like it's a big deal. So Rumble, we probably did find the right compensation nerfs. If you're a player and you have ideas, feel free to share them. I'm happy to listen to what you want nerfed in your champion. Seriously, it's cool. We also know that Rek'Sai needs buffs right now. These minor bug fixes are not going to cover it. Rek'Sai is at least, I think, 1% underpowered, but I have not done the full investigation of did a flood of bad Rek'Sai players come in, or is she actually weaker? Again, we'll buff her as needed. If you want to share your favorite buff for Rek'Sai, feel free. I was leaning like 6 base AD because she needs it. Her attacks kind of suck, and her first clear kind of sucks. But if you have opinions, again, feel free to share them. And of course, the rest of reactive balance, Ilaria is a bit weak, and we'll do other stuff as needed. But I wanted to talk about this. I thought it was really interesting, diving in, figuring out what was going on, understanding a new quirk of our game engine, getting presented with new information and being like, it matches my model. Nice. Like that's the mark of it. You know what you're doing is something else comes in. You're like, it still matches. We're good. That's a good confidence booster. And yeah, we have a script fix in right now. It is in release. You actually play it on PBE by the time you watch this video, maybe, or 12 hours afterwards. And it will almost certainly go live at some point. We'll have the engineering fix as well. The guy's still working on this overall, so we will likely have an engine update that will make this cleanly work more cleanly as well. But I wanted to share this story. I thought it was interesting. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.